Hey guys, so since we are still technically in Cataclysm Classic, with the Pandaria pre-patch, uh, until the end of the month, I think, we got Mad Cow or Mad Season. Uh, why Cataclysm was so controversial? Was it, just the tone of the game? Was it the fact that Blizzard was like, "Oh, hey guys, you know that world you've been questing in for like 6, 7 years? We're gonna change it. We're gonna change it." Um, what was it? So like, because personally, I enjoyed Cataclysm, like the questing part of it, and except for Vazir. Vazir could just go fuck itself. Beautiful zone. Don't want to go there. I don't. Vazir can just go fuck off. Also, this dude, he needs to chill. Like the overhypeness in his voice, he needs to chill. Needs to chill. Number 15. Um anyway, let's listen to Mad Season and maybe see why Cataclysm was so controversial.
This board is on the verge of a gratuitous plug, and the makers of the game certainly have enough wealth for self-promotion, but the new glitzy version of it comes out a week from Tuesday.
Cataclysm is our biggest and most epic expansion yet.
The year is 2010, and the World of Warcraft is basking in the glow of its second expansion, The Wrath of the Lich King. As you would know if you caught episode 6 of the series, Wrath was a juggernaut, to say the least. It was an expansion that evolved its storytelling capability with its delivery of the haunting tale of Arthas Menethil. It modernized the raiding scene with its introduction of heroic mode, and it was the first to introduce a new class, the Death Knight, to name just a few of the breakout features. It was, for many, the golden era of World of Warcraft, and a time where Blizzard seemed to be unstoppable. But every story must end, and by the time that Wrath...
He just missed a chance to say the whole no king rules forever. But yeah, Wrath of the Lich King, I think, got up to like 11 million players, which is a lot. And then Cataclysm happened, and it's just been kind of going down ever since. They'll see major spikes with certain patches, or Legion did really good though. Bringing back Illidan. People really liked the artifacts, but each patch or each expansion is like, but it really doesn't really, for the most part, isn't drawing in people the way it used to. Again, 11 million players. That was insane back then. So Cataclysm comes out, and the numbers go down, and they were good patches. Things were fun. Oh, but of course, there are just certain decisions that Blizzard made that were just questionable. Like I said, breaking the world, changing it from what we've, went through and got to know so well for 6, 7 years. But also changing things like, like Orgrimmar, between Vanilla, BC, and Wrath. Orgrimmar looked one way. You knew it, you loved it, and then all of a sudden you step into this new Orgrimmar and you're like, what the fuck is this? The drag, which was dark and shaded, now you go through, and despite the fact that there's these large things that should be blocking the sun, it's still bright. It's still sunny, and it makes no sense whatsoever. So it kind of feels like it took away some personality that the game had when it comes to visuals. But
was settling down, Blizzard was ready to shake things up in a more drastic way yet. The Cataclysm World of Warcraft's third expansion, this wasn't just another chapter. It was a seismic shift that reshaped Azeroth itself. But with great ambition comes great risk, and whereas today, their previous two entries go down as almost unanimously masterpieces, Cataclysm has instead left behind a legacy steeped in controversy, and any mention of it within the community is sure to start a debate. So what was the Cataclysm, and why do many today label it as one of Blizzard's most controversial expansions? But first, a word from our sponsor.
Expansion set that will very literally change the face of the world of Azeroth as you know it. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you World of Warcraft Cataclysm.
The announcement was made during the height of Wrath's popularity in 2009 during their BlizzCon convention, and, as you heard, the excitement was as palpable as ever. Between the Burning Crusade and Wrath, the thought of a bad expansion was simply an impossibility to the ever-growing player base. The pattern was firmly set. A new expansion releases, it breaks records, and the game just becomes better, and more people join. But this is where problems would first arise, as these grand expectations would cast a looming dark shadow, leaving the question, how could Blizzard possibly exceed these unimaginable expectations set for a video game developer which, at this point, hasn't missed? Well, it was perhaps these massive expectations that motivated what was possibly the most ambitious expansion ever released, as players learned that their world was about to change, literally. When the World of Warcraft was first released in 2004, it revolutionized the industry for many reasons, one of the biggest being its world. MMOs are defined by many things, but perhaps their most defining characteristic is the size of the worlds. It's in the name, the massively multiplayer online role-playing game. If you're going to share a world with thousands of other players, or even more, it had better be big, and at the time, they were. From the rolling hills of Norath in EverQuest, to the fields of Britannia in Ultima Online, or the massive planets in Star Wars galaxies, the worlds were indeed massive. But, as my ladies often tell me, size doesn't always matter, and as large as they were often quite empty, holding large plains of nothing but generic mob spawns to grind the more open.
Yeah, so MMOs were definitely different back then. They're not the way they were today. Slow. Not a lot going on in the world itself for the most part. So when World of Warcraft came out, everyone thought it was just going to be like, EverQuest or RuneScape or something like that, where it's like, oh yeah, my friends play it during lunch in the library at school. But they didn't expect it to reach the success that it did. Obviously, Blizzard's been around for a while, and while we had Warcraft, the RTS, taking that world that we had known and make it into an MMO where you're making your character and you're running around in this world that we've explored to some extent in the RTS. People were like, is this really going to work? Star Wars did it. I have EverQuest and all those other games. But for Warcraft to then turn into World of Warcraft, it's like, is this going to work? And then people started playing and realized, yeah, it is. This is really good. The world feels alive. It's the art style's good compared to what you had back then. I mean, look at some of the games like EverQuest and Star Wars and stuff like that, and then look at World of Warcraft like vanilla. It's so gorgeous. Even now, the places that, like, imagine your first time logging in till and you like most people, for whatever reason, you made a night elf, right? You log in, right? You get in that starting area, you look around, and what's the first thing you think? Wow, this is gorgeous. you're questing, you get to like places like Ashenvale and stuff like that, and you see these beautiful colors, trees, and the this and that, and you're like, wow, this game is gorgeous. It's got a cartoony art style, especially when it comes to like the characters, but the surroundings, it's very complicated looking compared to other games. Nowadays, it gets more and more complicated. The geometry and everything gets more and more complicated, and things become a lot more vertically challenging. You start in a zone, back in the day where there's just a few hills, maybe a few trees. No, now we've got, places that we need mounts just to zoom up there, because they like making things so vertically challenging now. But yeah, vanilla, when it first came out, no one thought it was going to be as successful. Blizzard didn't even think it was going to be that successful. It was like, oh, we'll have a few people, a couple 100,000. But no, it just went way beyond that.
Sandbox style that the genre was more known for. That is, until World of Warcraft. The sheer size of Azeroth itself was certainly something to behold, but where it had this quantity, where it really shined was its quality, as nearly every of these 40 zones had a fully curated, linear, theme park questing campaign that took players straight from level 1 all the way to the max at the time, which was 60. This was simply unheard of at the time, and whether it was a dungeon, a quest hub, an enemy camp, or an outdoor raid boss, each and every corner of Azeroth had purpose, and it was meticulously handcrafted by the developers inch by inch. In terms of world design, it absolutely blew every other MMO out of the water.
We all remember that feeling. For Alliance players. For me, it was taking my first steps out of, Valley of Trials and making my way into Durotar, but, I did also went back and did the Alliance experience, and that feeling of finally making my way out of Elwynn Forest and into Westfall. And you can see right there just the complete contrast between Elwynn Forest and Westfall. Westfall, it's a farming zone, there's a lot of little farms and this and that. And then you look back at Elwynn Forest, which is lush and green, and just the contrast between the two. You go into Westfall and they have some amazing quests. And it really sets the tone for what you can expect. I mean, Westfall is a continuation, really. Elwynn Forest kind of set the precedent of, hey, welcome to the World of Warcraft. Well, if you were Alliance players, I mean. For us, it was Durotar and everything if you were Horde. But if you're an Alliance player, that Elwynn Forest zone, that was your experience. Like, hey guys, welcome to the World of Warcraft. Have fun. And then you're going over that bridge and you step over the Westfall and you just see the contrast between the two. You pick up your first quest over there, and you're like, wow, this is really good. I thought it was going to change, like those would be, and then we get over here and it's just going to suck. No, it's good. I like this. I like this a lot. I think people kind of feel that way regardless. It's like when Night Elves, right? You're questing and you finally get to Darnassus, right? You look at Darnassus and you're like, oh my god, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. You got your little portals that will, like, oh yeah, this will take you there. Just step through and but they showed that the quest that they start you off with, that quality is going to continue. Nowadays, it's like, oh boy, another fetch quest, another, whatever, go kill 4 of these, or go get me 5 bunny hearts, but back then, this was still good stuff. We were eating well. We were eating real good. We were locking on every day doing the quest, and we're like, wow, every one of these is very good. Nowadays, it's like, oh boy. Oh boy. It's 2005 and I'm still going around for rabbit hearts.
Water, and it was one of the main reasons why it became so popular. But in Blizzard's eyes, by the late 2000s, its age had started to show. especially compared to the zones and quests held by their more modern expansions, whereas the Burning Crusade and Wrath held, by the time standards, very intricate and story-driven quest lines. The old world, they had felt, aged quite poorly, providing this dated experience of this bland kill X, gather Y quests. They rarely held any story, as the world itself was more of the main character in vanilla World of Warcraft. There weren't really any antagonists to chase or plans to thwart. To Blizzard, it was just the player and 59 uncaptivating levels to grind through. And it's because of this that it would become the target of one of the most extreme changes in a single expansion, even to this date. The entire old world would be completely redone from the ground.
And that's one problem. I think Blizzard, in their search to try to keep things fresh, them changing the world really didn't sit well. Like, private servers do this all the time. Ascension does this, where you can have those old world zones, but guess what? You can add new and exciting quest lines. Classic with Season of Discovery shows that perfectly. So they didn't have to break the world to keep it fresh and exciting. They could have added more quests and more unique quests to those already existing zones. And which is something they've tried to do nowadays, especially like in Legion, when we were going around for our artifacts. We were going to fucking Karazhan, we were going to Tears Fall Glades, and all these other old places. They could have done that, but instead they're like, oh yeah, let's just break the world. Yeah, hey guys, the world you've been questing in that you know and love for the past 6-7 years? Yeah, we're gonna change that. Sorry, just trying to keep it fresh. But they didn't have to do that. Private servers do it all the time, and they're successful. Like I said, Ascension WoW does it. Is it all just a few quests that are fun and interesting, good rewards, and players will be sound as a pound. It's not that hard to keep players happy. It's really not.
Up. Every single quest, NPC, and item would be reworked. New storylines would be introduced in each and every zone. Antagonists would be created, and the main characters started to shift from the world itself to the individual player, aiming to make them feel like they were at the center of this unforgettable adventure. And it was all to be explored with the comfort of flying mounts, introducing another landmark change in the previously restricted Eastern Kingdoms in Kalimdor. All this is to say, they aimed to rock the very foundation of the world as players knew it, and it would be done through the actions of the expansion's villain, Deathwing, otherwise known as Neltharion. He was one of the 5 dragon aspects, which were colossal beings empowered by the Titans to safeguard Azeroth, charged with protecting the planet's very crust. Neltharion embodied strength and stability, with his black dragonflight being a symbol of resilience. Alongside his kin, Alexstrasza, Ysera, Malagos, and Nazdormo, he stood as a pillar of order in a chaotic world. His deep connection to the Earth gave him unmatched power, but it also made him a target. In the War of the Ancients, which was 10,000 years before the Cataclysm, the Old Gods, which were malevolent entities imprisoned beneath Azeroth, sensed his strength and burrowed into his mind. Their whispers of power and paranoia twisted Neltharion and planted the seeds of betrayal that would fester for millennia. By the time of the War of the Ancients, Neltharion's corruption was complete. He crafted an artifact called the Demon Soul, which was a golden disc infused with the power of all of the dragonflights, and it was made under the guise of uniting them against the Burning Legion's invasion.
Yeah, so by this point, Neltharion was corrupted. We learned more about Neltharion in Dragonflight, but the story still goes of that moment where he imbues the dragon soul with the power of the aspects, where he just kind of shows up and, they're trying to figure out what to do, and he's like, hey guys, I made something. You guys should put your power into this. And they're like, why? Well, because it's the only way we can win. I'm just gonna float this right here, and all you guys gotta do is just put your powers into it. And they're like, this seems like a trap. And Neltharion just scoffs and like, oh, a trap? Me? I'm one of your brethren. Would I do something like that? And they're like, well, we see no reason not to trust you. So they imbue the dragon soul with their power. And so, he chuckles and is like, haha, you fools! I tricked you. And they're like, oh my god, I totally didn't see this coming. Yeah, and he's like, yep, I just used it to steal your powers. And now I'm going to use it to empower myself, and I'll be the strongest dragon ever. And they sit there and they're like, oh man, I wish we saw this coming. We could have done something about it. Oh well, nothing we can do now. It didn't really happen like that, obviously. That's just a breakdown of what happened. Because clearly, come on, the way the guy was walking and talking and presenting it, none of them picked up that it was evil and said, no, I'm not putting my power into that thing.
But it was a lie. Manipulated by the old gods, Neltharion used the demon soul to dominate his kin, turning against the other aspects and their allies. His scales cracked, molten lava seeped from his wounds as his body mirrored his fractured mind, and he renamed himself Deathwing. He unleashed devastation, nearly dooming Azeroth until the demon soul was stolen and hidden, and defeated, he fled, nursing his hatred in the shadows. In the Second War, he resurfaced, manipulating the Orcish horde to serve his needs, and under the guise of aiding their conquest, he sought the demon soul's return, using his human alias, Lord Davil Prestor, to infiltrate the Alliance and to sow discord. His plans were crumbled when the demon soul was destroyed by Ronan, and so he retreated to the elemental plane of Deepholm, where his body was held together by adamantine plates forged to contain his molten core. For years he lay dormant, his rage simmering, and
yeah, that's what people don't understand sometimes. Like, I see people reacting to like the cinematic here, and they don't, even some people who play the game don't seem to understand that he wasn't wearing the armor just for fun. He had to have Elementium plate, which could harness and kind of contain the elements. He had to wear Elementium plates to keep his body from ripping apart, because his body was ripping apart due to the power and the strength and the madness. So they had to see these Elementium plates onto him, otherwise his body would rip apart. And after it did, you kind of saw what happened in the raid. After we're up there riding on him and we tear off these Elementium plates, what happens? He fully loses himself. He falls into the maelstrom and he becomes like this mindless creature that just has nothing in his mind except for destruction and death. That's why he was holding himself together with Elementium plates. Because if his body ripped apart, that's what would happen. So, yeah, this dude's like, oh man, we gotta do something about this. So he has all these plates just all over him, just because his body's ripping itself apart.
his allegiance to the old gods deepening, which brings us to the events of Cataclysm, where Blizzard sought time to unleash him as the expansion's central antagonist. Emerging from Deepholm, his eruption shattered Azeroth's crust and reshaped continents, as mentioned in an event known as the Shattering. The Barrens split, the Thousand Needles flooded, and even Stormwind City wasn't safe from his wrath. His Twilight's Hammer cult, which was led by the ogre mage Cho'Gall, spread chaos, while his elemental lords like Ragnaros and Alakir rallied to his cause. His goal was apocalypse, and to usher in the Hour of Twilight, which is a vision of the old gods where Azeroth would fall to darkness. Unlike Arthas, whose tragedy and wrath was more rooted in humanity, discarded for vengeance, Deathwing was a force of pure destruction. Yet there still was a twisted nobility to his madness, as he believed that he was saving Azeroth by purging its weaknesses, with his old god-driven paranoia convincing him that he could reshape the world. Players would encounter him in a few different ways, eventually as the finale as a raid boss, but first from random zone attacks where he would torch entire areas, and also key quest lines revealing his plans. But it wasn't just the world that was changing, it was the game itself, including many of its gameplay systems, one of the most drastic being its class design and balance. Coming off of Wrath, where class design had hit this sweet spot with refined specializations and the introduction of dual spec, Blizzard faced a difficult question. How do you top a system that players already loved? Up until this moment, the classes operated as follows. On character creation, you're offered up a choice of 10 different classes, each with 3 different specializations that allowed you to fine-tune your gameplay to suit your needs. And aside from a select few from talent trees, they all had access to the same spells. For instance, a fire mage was generally better off casting primarily fire spells, but they can still cast a variety of frost and arcane magic should they find the need to do so. This offered a lot of freedom, and it opened the way to unique hybrid builds, but as players became better and more knowledgeable, metagaming was becoming more established. It wasn't 2004 anymore. Social media and database websites were growing and becoming more refined. YouTube was gaining in popularity, which gave convenient access to full video walkthroughs on how to optimize rotations and gameplay. It seemed day by day it was more and more possible to play correctly and incorrectly, and so Blizzard argued that this freedom was really just an illusion, as most players would just default to a few cookie-cutter builds to maximize their performance, and it's because of this is why they were overhauled so drastically in Cataclysm. Now, upon reaching level 10 and selecting their first talent point, players would be forced to choose a specialization and tree to dedicate their first 31 points to before they were allowed to invest into the other 2 trees.
Which didn't matter, because even though you were forced to stick to one tree, it was still cookie cutter. You know, people would say, oh, make sure you put more into this one. And then once you reached it, it's like, oh, well, if you're, blood decay, it's recommended you do this because this will increase your DPS even. It was still cookie cutter. That's the thing that Blizzard can't get away from. Still cookie cutter, even now. Even with the new tree and the new system, which I like. I like the fact that it goes back to this, the talent tree, because in Mist of Pandaria, we get that freaking, like every 15 levels, like 15, you get to pick a talent, or it's just, no, I like to see like 1%, 2%. It may not be a lot, but it makes it feel like you're getting something. So for me, instead of clicking like in Pandaria, clicking new talents, I prefer to go with things that, passives that increase my power, or, whatever the case is. One, I don't like having a bunch of buttons to press. I'm one of those guys. I don't like having like, just bars of just things to press. No. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. So anytime I have a chance to choose a passive, I choose a passive. Especially if it helps me in the long run, like with monks. Like your level 45 talent, there's one to increase your energy regeneration. Well, why wouldn't you pick that? Like the other 2 are skills, and just why not pick the passive that increases your chi by 1, your energy regeneration by like 15-20%. Why not pick that one? I don't like a bunch of buttons to have to press. But regardless, you're never going to have a fully true free experience. There's always going to be a cookie cutter aspect to it, and that's something Blizzard doesn't really seem to think about.
Additionally, while the spells for that spec would become more powerful, the player would also now lose access to many of the spells core to the remaining 2 specializations. So now that same fire mage can no longer cast spells such as Frostbolt or arcane missiles. This was a far more rigid structure, and it was done, as explained by the developers, to add more identity to each spec and to provide a more unique gameplay experience, as well as printing down excessive clutter, which by the 3rd expansion was beginning to get out of control, as it was common and expected that each class would receive new spells and talents. By the time Wrath rolled around, the trees weren't unlike your mom's bush. They were quite massive and growing out of control, they argued. And so, Cataclysm slashed these trees down and significantly reduced the number of talents and giving a talent point every other level, as opposed to what was previously every level, with 41 points total being available at the new cap, which was level 85. And the class mechanics themselves also saw a revamp. Blizzard wanted every spec to feel dynamic and punchy, and for this they primarily leaned into their resource systems and active abilities. Hunters had their mana bars replaced by the focus system, which was similar to the rogue's energy, making the rotations feel snappier. Holy priests gained chakra, a stance-like mechanic that shifted their healing style based on group needs, whether that be single target, AoE, or a hybrid. Warlocks saw their soul shards reworked from inventory items to a UI-based resource, and pretty much every spec would see similar drastic changes in this attempt to modernize the class system, and all of this together for many was arguably an even greater change than the reshaping of the world, as it seemed like every class had a major makeover, and it transformed so wildly in the transition from Wrath. Speaking of modernization, gear and stats were also in Blizzard sights. This was something of a slow burn up until this point. Starting in Vanilla WoW, the itemization was quite diverse, or as some would say, cluttered. From hit to crit to weapon skill, healing power, spell power, specific elemental power, penetration. There's almost an overwhelming amount of stats to choose from, and while this has its own benefits, this too was something that Blizzard said fell victim to metagaming, as some of them were outright ignored or unwanted by the majority of the player base. And so, in response, they were either removed or they were merged into other stats into a more one-size-fits-all sort of style, where the chances of obtaining useful gear was now more reliant on its armor type rather than their individual stats, regardless of your specialization, as the itemization saw huge changes in an attempt to adapt to a player base that was becoming more and more knowledgeable as they racked up experience and social media and database websites grew around them. Another major feature tied to gear and stats was reforging, which allowed players to fine-tune their equipment. In the major cities, you would visit an NPC who, for a fee, could take any piece of rare or epic quality gear and convert 40% of one of its secondary stats into another. This was released once more to make gear more adaptable and one-size-fits-all, and also
I didn't mind it. I liked it. You know, because someone who didn't really raid a whole lot, I mean, I got into raiding more in Cataclysm, but if you got a really good piece of gear, but it gave you something stupid that you didn't really need, like spirit, you could then take that spirit and convert it to something you need, like hit. Because obviously, the more hit you have, the better chance you have of hitting your target. So obviously back then, hit was a huge thing that you needed. So getting a piece of gear, it's like, okay, it's a major upgrade, but it has spirit. So let me just go over here and convert that spirit to hit rating. There you go. I don't see why they took it out. Really wasn't much of an issue. But it's simple. You know? Here we got choose a stat to reduce, so they chose to hit reduce their hit, but then chose to raise their mastery. But you could, again, you get a really good piece of gear, but it's got a stat that you don't need. You can lower that secondary stat that you don't really want and boost something else to make it more viable. Simple. And for some reason, this was an issue to people.
for things like hit caps, or just switching a portion of undesirable stats into a better fit for your specialization. So at this point, it was very clear that accessibility was a main focus of Cataclysm. And similar to the Burning Crusade, it would also feature two new races, the Worgen for the Alliance and the Goblin for the Horde. Since Warcraft 2, the Goblins have been this neutral entity within the realm of Azeroth and are loyal only to gold, crafting zeppelins, shredders, and bombs. They're known for their cunning and greedy nature, with their home island of Kazan serving as a bustling hub of commerce and shady deals. Long before Cataclysm, they thrived, although their society was a cutthroat corporate ladder, with trade princes like Gallywix ruling through wealth and betrayal. Sound familiar? When Deathwing's emergence triggered volcanic eruptions, their island became a ticking time bomb. and they scrambled to escape, only to be betrayed by Gallywix, who sold them into slavery. Rescued by the Horde after a shipwreck, they would swear loyalty to the war chief Thrall, and they traded their neutrality for a new home in the Orgrimmar slums. As for the Worgen, these are the cursed humans of Gilneas. Their story began long before the Cataclysm in the Kingdom of Gilneas, a secluded and industrial nation on Azeroth's northern coast, and after the Second War, their king, Greymane, walled off the city and isolated it from the Alliance to avoid their conflicts. But soon after, a mysterious curse appeared, born from the druidic experiments of the Archmage Arugel, and it spread through Gilneas, turning its citizens into these feral, wolf-like creatures. Those afflicted fought to retain their humanity, and were aided by the Night Elf Kaldore, who offered a ritual to balance their feral and human sides. When Deathwing struck, the Forsaken invaded Gilneas and forced them to flee and to rejoin the Alliance. The old races weren't left out though, as the Cataclysm also marks the time when new race and class combinations appeared. Whether it was the Gnome Priest, or Troll Druids, human and undead hunters, or Dwarf Warlocks and Shamans. In total, there were 13 new combinations, and they were justified, sometimes very clumsily, within new lore introduced with the expansion. This would provide quite a stark contrast to other areas of the game, where freedom and choice were being heavily restricted, and fans were quite eager to explore the many new combinations. The game, as usual, would also see substantial updates in future patches, and probably one of the most landmark was transmogrification, a very long time requested feature. This allowed players to alter the visual appearance of their armor and weapon to that of any other that they had obtained, as long as it was of the same armor type and usable by their class.
Yeah, so people who've just started playing WoW nowadays, you don't know the struggle of having to go through, and you have all this mishmash of gear, and you just look like an idiot. You know, you look like an idiot. Only after obtaining like tier set pieces where you decked out to look nice. But if you were just questing and you got to max level and you weren't really into the raiding scene, you looked like a goofball. Nowadays, pretty much as soon as you start the game, you could transmog yourself, your weapons, and all that. And so even when you're leveling, you don't need to look like a goof anymore. You can deck yourself in your judgment set if you're a paladin or whatever, even though you can use it on other plate users. But yeah, you can transmog pretty much right away. Back then, we didn't have that. So Cataclysm comes along, is like, hey guys, we know how much you wanted to change how you look. You know, for all you guys who are tired of looking like idiots because you don't have tier sets, well, now you can change yourself to look more, you know, even. And it took off, which is why there's such a big focus on transmog nowadays. I love collecting stuff, so, you know, I'll go around and just, especially right now with drop rates being increased to like the end of the month or whatever, perfect time to go around and maybe get some of those tier sets that I've been lacking or, you know, skipping out on because I'm like, oh, I really don't feel like doing it. So, but transmog, it's always been a big thing, and nowadays Blizzard focuses and designs things pretty much intentionally for transmog, where you'll have vendors who just give out transmog gear or weapons. No stats or anything, just appearances. So it's cool that they took something like this and incorporated it so much into the game.
This combined with other features such as mount and pet collections becoming account-wide, as well as the cash shop offering a variety of cosmetics being purchasable, marked a new era for aesthetics and collections. The end game for some is high-end arena, for others it's heroic raiding, and now for a very substantial portion of the audience, it was collecting mounts, pets, toys, transmogs, achievements, an aspect of the game that some would say is quite dominant today after 2 decades of collectibles injected into it. And aside from all of this, the expansion of course had the features that were pretty common and expected at this point. The level cap was raised, new zones, dungeons, and raids were to be released. One of the major differences being that instead of going off into this far-off land, like with the Outland in the Burning Crusade or Northrend for Wrath, the players would instead stay within the comfort of the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor. Some of the originally planned zones and areas from the original vanilla version of the game were finally finished, such as the rolling hills of Mount Hyjal, or the vast desert of Uldum, and even the new PvP area Tol Barad, which was similar to Wintergrasp in this objective-based battleground held in the open world where the two factions battle for control of a prison and, upon victory, gain access to a unique raid. PvP in general saw some pretty big updates, first with being a couple of new battlegrounds, the Battle for Gilneas and the Twin Peaks, which were the same game modes as the Arathi Basin and Warsong Gulch, but just on new maps. And additionally, they saw a huge update with the raided mode. Up until this point, they were a more casual stepping stone to Arena and more of a low-stakes way to get this introductory PvP gear. But they saw a big change in Cataclysm when they released this structured raiding mode, similar to Arena, where points can now be won or lost, and once reaching a high enough rating, players would be able to earn higher quality gear. Profession saw updates with new recipes across the board, as well as an entire new one called Archaeology. This was another secondary profession, along with first aid, fishing, and cooking, where players could scour dig sites for a variety of interesting items, including mounts, pets, recipes, and even high-end gear. Even the social structure saw some updates with the introduction of guild levels, where a portion of the members' experience would contribute to the shared 25-level system, which would unlock a variety of useful perks such as heirlooms, teleports, XP boosts, guild bank slots, recipes, mounts, pets, and even more. And last but not least, character progression would be expanded upon even further with the Path of the Titan system, which was tied to archaeology and used to unlock powerful ancient glyphs where you would pledge allegiance to a Titan and gain unique perks over time. Once a player hit the max level, they would choose what was called a Titan's Path, which was tied to a member of the Pantheon, like Amanthul for Time Mastery or Norgannon for Arcane Power. The idea was, through archaeology, you would dig up these Titan artifacts across Azeroth, and you would trade them for progress towards your path. Each path had 10 ranks, and at each rank you would pick from 2 or 3 ancient glyphs that offered unique bonuses such as stat boosts or even abilities in some cases. Suffice to say, the expansion was absolutely packed with features, and they would be so extreme in their changes, even reading about them would be jarring. Major core features were being completely overhauled, quality of life was being injected into every single orifice, and nearly any jank left over from its formative years were sanded down and disposed of. It was clear, this was the most ambitious and intense expansion by far, and as things winded down in Wrath, the stage was set once more for a new adventure, and one that would change the course of World of Warcraft to a place that many today say is unrecognizable to those who clung to the old days. But the real question was it any good? Normally, at this point, I would talk about people lining up in front of stores, eager to get their hands on a copy of the expansion. But appropriately, this would be the first jarring difference, as 2010 also marked the era where digital downloads were becoming more and more common. People had upgraded from their 56K modems at this point and had transitioned to high-speed internet, allowing for games to be downloaded digitally. There were still midnight releases, but with these new capabilities and a large portion of the player base suffering from social anxiety, the spectacle of a new expansion launch was primarily held within households instead of big box game stores. That being said, launch day issues still persisted, as was common and expected. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary though, and once players inevitably passed the login screen boss, they embarked on a new adventure. They explored the new zones, they got roasted quite nicely by Deathwing himself, and started to experience the expansion's many features. As for the story and the questing, following suit with Wrath, it continued this very story-driven theme, by establishing villains and sub-villains, with each zone having this structured story to unravel. Largely due to the great reception in Wrath, the in-game cutscenes and cinematics were quite common at this point, and it would thrust the game even further into this storytelling narrative and leading players through very long quest chains, 5-player dungeons, and of course endgame raiding. The dungeons, particularly heroics, are remembered today as being quite difficult. One of the criticisms with Wrath was that it followed suit with the Burning Crusade by awarding epics, but without intense reputation grinding required to enter. Combining this with the fact that they were just far easier in general, these once epic items were now quite trivial to come by, as many of the player base started to referring to them as welfare epics. And so in Cataclysm, while reputations...
Yeah, I think there were actually groups back then called like welfare epic farming. Because, you know, you go into these heroics and they just dropped. They just dropped. But that's one thing that was actually kind of good, because some people just didn't want to raid. So how do you give those people a chance to get the same kind of, somewhat the same kind of gear that the raiders would get? You put it in a heroic dungeon. That's what they do now. Basically everything you do now in the game can drop like raid level gear. Because Blizzard now knows that not everyone is going to dedicate their lives to raiding. Some people prefer PvP. Some people prefer questing. Some people, for some reason, do a lot of world quests. So no matter what you're doing in the game, you don't have to worry about, oh man, how do I get the gear? You can get really good gear just by doing 5 heroic or 5 time walking dungeons. You know, it gives you, after you do 5 of them, it gives you a chest, and inside that chest is a piece of, like, raid level gear. There you go, free piece. You do that stuff, you can go to the vault, you get a piece of gear from that. So 2 pieces of gear right there. So they're doing ways because, you know, again, not everyone has time to raid, not everybody wants to raid. Nobody wants to, you know, wants to be caught up in hours of prepping and you know, going through a raid only for you guys to fail. Like, I remember going through Firelands and just, it was so uncoordinated that we just died from trash. It took us forever just to get to the first boss. And I'm sitting there like, do I really want to keep doing this? I could be doing other things, and here I am wasting my time dying to trash because the leaders don't know what the hell they're doing. So nowadays, you don't have to worry about that. So them adding stuff into heroics and gear that was, you know, quality gear, but it was like candy and being handed out. It's like everybody was getting it.
Still wasn't required to enter. Their difficulty was increased greatly, and they provided quite a stiff challenge, especially in the early weeks of the expansion launch. Between this and all of the dungeons prior to Wrath being added to the Dungeon Finder system, as well as a couple being remade with the old world, Cataclysm was quite an active expansion, in fact, for those who enjoyed dabbling in 5-player content. As for the raids, they followed the route set by Wrath, offering 2 sizes, 10 and 25 men, with 2 difficulty modes, normal and heroic. Similar to its predecessor, normal was a much more accessible version of raiding compared to the raids of yesteryear in the Burning Crusade and vanilla, and those seeking a greater challenge and therefore greater rewards would be funneled into the heroic mode, where the bosses and enemies had more health, dealt more damage, and even gained new mechanics. As for the actual fights, they're as polished as ever. Although there certainly were outliers throughout World of Warcraft's 20-year run so far, the raid design is rarely the focus of negative criticism, and the same would be true for Cataclysm, with the one outlier being the finale, Dragon Soul, which left some players underwhelmed with the Deathwing fight, and confused why the second to the last fight, which was the Spine of Deathwing, was far more difficult than the actual final fight. Far more impactful in the long term though, and this would be something that the expansion would eventually become infamous for, was the addition of the Raid Finder, added in patch 4.3. Following suit with Wrath's addition of the Dungeon Finder, Blizzard decided to make raiding even more accessible with this queued raid finding system. It was quite simple. With a click of a button, you would be matched with 24 other players and thrown together to tackle raid encounters. This would be the third difficulty of raiding at the time, and the lowest of the three to account for the lack of coordination that a conventional guild would have, and therefore also rewarding the lowest quality loot of the three. In a lot of ways, it perfectly encapsulated the direction that Blizzard had been steering the game ever since its launch, to be accessible. One of the main reasons why World of Warcraft became popular to begin with was that it was the first MMO that was accessible to the casual player. Simply put, the genre was just not for the faint of heart, and one of WoW's claims to fame was its accessibility, and that started at its launch, and they never stopped. Through 25-player rating, Dungeon Finder, and multiple difficulty modes to name just a few. From its launch, the game was becoming more and more accessible to the average player, and Cataclysm was no different. It just happened to be the point where many said that they went too far with it.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I mean, obviously, it's not his opinion, as far as we know, but accessibility. You know, you don't want your game to just forever be the main core that's been there for the last 20 years, as of right now. You want to make the game accessible, because some people might look at this game and say, you know what, it looks kind of complicated. And I am really tired of that goofy-looking fucking redneck next door revving up his stupid fucking cars as I'm trying to record a video. But accessibility, again, people are like, oh man, you know, it looks like it's a fun game, but I don't know, you know, it looks kind of complicated too, and you know, I just don't have a lot of time. And well, Dungeon Finder, Raid Finder, great for the people who are like that, who want to play the game but no, they don't have a lot of time, don't have hours on end to spend in a raid party and all that. I mean, I never understood why these sorts of things piss players off. No one's forcing you directly to play them. No one's forcing you to interact with that kind of thing. If you want to continue forming a raid and doing it the old-fashioned way, great. This is to help people get into the game who might be kind of like, oh, well, how is this a bad thing? What, you're trying to gatekeep the game? Sorry, the game's just meant for us, for people who don't want the dungeon finders and raid finders. If you play the game, you need to do it the old-fashioned way. No, accessibility. That's what draws people in who might think about playing the game, but may be afraid because they think the game's too complicated. Or that, oh man, I know people have to put a lot of time and effort into the game. Well, now you don't. Now you can benefit, you'll get gear, it's not going to be the best, but it's still something. It'll make you feel like you're progressing, because I guarantee it's still going to be better than what you're wearing at the time. So I never saw how this or Dungeon Finder would ever be an issue. Especially given how dungeons were back in the day and how raids were back in the day. Helping someone get into a group faster and not have to spend 3-4 hours just waiting for a group to form. What? Why is that an issue?
Edges are sanded down, they become finer, but still, something is lost in the process. And once finished, the standards for what is rough are gradually increased until eventually they run out of the fine details, and what were once core social and gameplay features are now being tossed aside in the name of quality of life. It is a never-ending forest fire that must always be fed, and in regards to the Raid Finder, this once holy grail endgame activity that players would strive and work for was now completable without even being in a guild, or even uttering a single word. There's simply no more communication or coordination or teamwork involved to see everything that the game had to offer. And appropriately, they awarded the lowest quality gear, but...
And I get where people are coming from that aspect. Oh, kill the social aspect. Again, no one's forcing you in particular to partake in this. If you want to raid the old-fashioned way, great. The people doing Raid Finder are the ones who want to go in, get the shit, get it done, and get the fuck out. They're not looking for a social aspect. They're not looking to make friends. They're not looking to sit there for 3 hours, 4 hours just forming a group. They want to go in, kill the bosses, get their gear, and get the fuck out. It is not ruining the game. I never understood why people were like, oh, it's killing the social aspect. The game's still social. You can still form groups the old-fashioned way. You can still do raids the old-fashioned way. But these were more for people that just didn't have the time to wait for 3-4 hours just to form a group. They want to go in, get their stuff, and get out. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, oh, well, then they should be... So you're going to gatekeep. You're going to say that just because they don't have the time, it's like, oh, well, if they know they don't have the time, then they should be playing. Maybe they want to. Accessibility is not a problem here. Really not that big of an issue. And yet people continue to make it seem like Raid Finder or Dungeon Finder are like these, oh god, they're killing the game. No, they're not. They're not. They're for people who don't really care about the social aspect. I understand it's an MMO, but some people just want to go in and just have fun on their own, just going around, doing quests, doing dungeons, you know? Play it the way you want it. Which is why Blizzard now kind of caters to so many play styles. Just play the way you want it. I mean, I don't understand why it's that big of an issue.
Being able to say that you, quote, completed an expansion and saw the full story, which was now a massive part of the game, it was no longer an achievement. Their difficulty was reduced massively to accommodate for the lack of coordination that was common with random queued groups, and the social structure of the game, which had already been declining, had now declined even further. So while some praised the game for reaching this new level of accessibility, others condemned it, citing that although World of Warcraft had defined itself by its accessibility, they had now passed this certain identifiable threshold where this erosion of accomplishment wasn't worth the increased accessibility. The Raid Finder still persists in the game today, and even still 15 years later, it remains to be a subject of heated debate between its player base. And these mixed reactions would become something of a running theme for the expansion. As for the class change and balance, many would praise the modernized mechanics like the new soul shard system for warlocks, or the hunter's resource change, as well as the revamped rotations. By giving each specialization signature abilities much earlier on at level 10, they had this clear-cut identity that separated them from the other two. The talent trees were trimmed down to be more manageable, focusing on quality over quantity, which made them much cleaner, but others thought that it wasn't worth the much more restrictive feel. Particularly those who discarded the meta and enjoyed hybrid builds felt left behind. Others felt that getting fewer talent points overall made leveling less exciting, and as shown today with the success of vanilla-based releases, there is appeal in simplicity, and, ironically enough, as accessible as the game was becoming, the complexity and agency now required of these new rotations would scare off some of the more casual players who just couldn't keep up with its new, hectic nature. As for the stat and gear changes, it was also a mixed reaction. The goal was to create a more streamlined system and eliminating what were deemed to be inferior stats and to transition into this more one-size-fits-all system. And it worked quite well in this regard, and players now had more freedom in switching specs and even roles without completely regearing. However, as convenient as this was, Blizzard would make what would some call a fatal error. By removing bad gear, they also removed good gear. The Bone Reaver's Edge is highly sought after because, in the very same raid, there exists Shadow Strike. By removing this gap in quality, it made their itemization less exciting, not only by reducing the unique nature of the gear, but also by reducing the highs as well as the lows, once again leading to this negative trade of whereby sanding down content for the sake of polish, something is inevitably lost. As for the reforging system, this too saw mixed reactions. While it was certainly a useful tool for targeting desired stats, at this point, between gems, enchants, and this reforging, getting a new piece of gear started to become a lot of work to those who didn't use spreadsheets, and a mostly meaningless exercise to those who did, as it fell under the same issue that they were already trying to fight. There's always a best and a meta to follow, so there's no real meaningful choice to be made. Just something to plug into a spreadsheet or ask Mr. Robot, and it would be for this reason that the whole system would be scrapped in their Warlords of Draenor expansion 4 years later. The new guild system also saw some mixed reactions. On one hand, while it was nice to have the shared goal to work towards and this new form of shared progression, a downside was that it made it much harder for new guilds to recruit members, as the perks were so beneficial that joining a low-level guild became quite unappealing, so much so that this too would be scrapped in the Warlords of Draenor expansion. And as for the Path of the Titans, there really wasn't much feedback to be had because it never existed. It was scrapped, and the reason for that was that they said that they couldn't work it into a system that really felt much different than the existing glyph system that was introduced in Wrath. So instead, they just added a new tier of glyph, which were a step up from the major tier. And an unfortunate side effect of this was that it left its accompanying profession, archaeology, in limbo, which resulted in it not seeing as much use as they had hoped. Regardless, the main criticism with this was that it was just extremely grindy and RNG dependent. There were a certain few very attractive items that players wanted, which had quite a low chance to obtain. Particularly for the gear, some were annoyed that the best in slot pieces were tied to this side, non-combat related activity. As for the world, as advertised, it was a complete overhaul of the 1 to 60 experience. Quests to kill 10 boars and retrieve 6 antlers were still there, but they were far less grindy, and they were also accompanied by cinematic quest lines inspired by Wrath storytelling. The new zones were definitely a highlight. There's Vashir, which was the underwater realm that introduced 3D movement without the use of flying mounts and let players swim through coral reefs and sunken ruins. Uldum's Egyptian-inspired quests, complete with Indiana Jones references, were definitely a fan favorite for their humor and spectacle, and Mount Hyjal's fight to save the world tree felt like a druidic epic. So these new zones, paired with the revamped old world, made leveling feel much more modern, with quests that wove story into every step. And much like in Wrath, players could also choose their starting path, which would split them up to ease launch day mob competition. However, as ambitious as it was, it did also alienate some of the veterans. As the gaming industry has learned with its many re-releases, nostalgia and familiarity are seductive traits, and for some, the vanilla world for Azeroth wasn't just a part of the game, it was the game, a nostalgic cornerstone of sorts, and a large part of World of Warcraft's early charm. By replacing it with these streamlined, story-driven questlines, it felt like it was losing a piece of its history. And as for the flying, while convenient, it also had the side effect of killing organic exploration, as well as world PvP, as players now zoomed over quiet areas that used to be battlegrounds. And the new zones, while quite well done, were also fewer than the previous expansions, something that was pinned on the revamp itself, as it was such a monumental undertaking. Some believed that because of that, they wouldn't have enough time to match the amount of zones held within Northrend and the Outland, which, if true, also explains the smaller level cap raise with just 5 levels instead of the standard 10. And this theory would also extend beyond the zones, as Cataclysm had a new low of just 9 new dungeons at launch, with 2 of them being revamps of old dungeons from vanilla. Perhaps the biggest change, however, came from their subscriptions, which, for the first time since its initial rise in 2004, had started to decline. And for the first time in its history, the king of MMOs showed signs of weakness. This loss today has become something of a debate itself. Some credit it to the expansion itself and its many features, others to controversies such as the Real ID system, where for a short time Blizzard had planned to post people's real-life information on their forums in order to cut down on trolling and toxicity, while others say that it was out of control of Blizzard, and it was more instead of the evolution of the player base and social media surrounding the game. By the end of Cataclysm, World of Warcraft was 8 years old, and since then many MMOs tried and failed to topple it. In the process, the MMO genre slowly lost one of its most crucial appeals: their mystery and uniqueness. Other genres of game had started to adopt many of the defining characteristics of the MMO genre. It was no longer unique to have a vast open world or giant bosses to take down in cooperative gameplay, or even things such as MMO-like loot. In 2004, since they were so niche, it was really the true birth of the genre, and it was quite easy to get lost in the spectacle and mystery of it all. But by 2012, due to the evolution of social media, it was no longer really that interesting to interact with someone from across the world anymore. Due to these 8 years of experience, there was far less mystery to uncover, and through increased skill and knowledge, the primary goal of the game had started to transition en masse from just playing it to playing it correctly, as rating achievements and add-ons like Gear Score had really begun to dominate and erase this wholesome charm that initially drew people to World of Warcraft to begin with. In those 8 years, teenagers became young adults. They started moving on with their lives, exited college and entered the workforce, exchanged fluids, became parents, and what little remained of their once beloved MMO was almost unrecognizable at this point due to the overwhelming amount of changes that it received in one fell swoop. Even down to the method of acquiring it was different. And while much of this is up for debate, what isn't is that Cataclysm is controversial. Those who dislike it don't even necessarily do so for what it is, but more for what it represents. By itself in a vacuum, it's not a bad expansion. While it certainly wasn't perfect, it did have all of the features and bells and whistles that one would come to expect from a theme park MMO, along with a hefty amount of polish. Yet, still, it remains controversial because it represents this transitional period where, for many, the magic and wonder had faded and was replaced with something that was foreign and unrecognizable. It should come as no surprise to you that at this point, private servers emulating the vanilla version of the game would see a massive surge in popularity, as they were now offering something that...
Wow, Phoenix WoW. I used to play on Phoenix WoW. I think that Phoenix WoW, and there was another one I used to play on all the time. But yeah, you know, when I got tired of WoW, and I was like, oh, let me see if there's anything like private servers or something. I came across Phoenix WoW, and most of them back then were more focused on PvP and raiding and all that. So they gave you like 50 times XP to where you could just go into a zone and pretty much max level and give you all the gear you need. It's like, okay, get raiding, guys. And raiding was actually harder. But, but I remember Phoenix WoW. I played it all the time. I mean, I had a few friends there. But I don't even know if Phoenix WoW is still a thing today.
Blizzard was no longer offering the original game that had originally captivated its player base. And that's why World of Warcraft's third expansion, the Cataclysm, was controversial.
Yeah, breaking of the world, changing things that people have come to know for 6, 7 years when there really was no need. Again, all they had to do is just go back and make those older zones just feel more lively. Private servers do it all the time. So there was no need for that. People complaining about accessibility. Again, no one's forcing you to do Dungeon Finder. No one's forcing you to do Raid Finder. Some people don't care about the social aspect that much. They just want a game to play for a couple of hours or however much time they have. They want to get in, get their gear, and get out. So no one's forcing you to do it. No, it's not affecting your gameplay in any kind of way. People who want to socialize will find groups the old-fashioned way. But it was also storytelling-wise, it was really, really fun. A lot of very cinematic, especially like in Oldham. You have Harrison Jones. A lot of fun story quests, or a lot of quests like the dwarf telling you the story of how he punched Neltharion in the face. The Oldham quest where you're just a flaming fireball and you're running over gnomes. It had a lot of fun stuff to it. We also had rogues have their legendary quest line where we get to meet Wrathion. For the Fangs of the Father. So it introduced a lot of good stuff, and so I mean, I look back at on Cataclysm, and it really wasn't bad. You know, it really wasn't that bad. I just don't like the fact that like nowadays we have Cataclysm Classic, when for us Classic was before the world was broken. So now we're moving on to the future where we have Mists of Pandaria Classic, and in another 10 years we'll be having Shadowlands Classic. You know, it's just, when does Classic stop being Classic? But overall, Cataclysm wasn't that bad. I mean, Vazir could have been better. Beautiful, but it sucks. It really does. You're right here. The enemy's all the way up here, but because the camera's around you, you don't see it until you pan the camera around and see that they're right there and you're right here. And you're constantly having to readjust. It was a pain in the ass. But I liked the dungeons. The raids were good when I actually bothered. You know, I did Firelands. I did Bastion of Twilight. Farian. All those. I remember getting up to Onyxia, you know, the resurrected Onyxia, and dying so many times because the group just wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And I remember actually beating it. Like, wow, this feels good. You know, I got more into like auction house and, you know, playing the auction house and stuff like that. So it was a good time for me. But I can see why people, actually, I think I did a lot of PvP back then too. It's something I don't do anymore. But for a lot of people, just introduce some things that, oh my god, it's the World of Warcraft killer. The same people who are still going on today about, oh my god, this is going to be the Warcraft killer. And here we are 20 years later. 20 years later, and it's still going. So maybe those people just need to shut up. Maybe you just need to shut up about the WoW killer. Whether it be another game or something in-game. Just shut up. Okay? WoW is still around. It's been around for 20 years now, and it's not going away anytime soon. Oh my god, it's the World of Warcraft killer. Ah. Anyway, that's going to do for me. You guys know the drill. I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.